Today, mummies and Halloween go together like eggs at Easter and flags on the 4th of July. But look more closely, and you'll find calendar ghouls everywhere from New Year's Day to Christmas. In fact, until very recently, mummies had more to do with other holiday celebrations than with Halloween. How is that possible? Let's unwrap this mystery together. Egyptian mummies and American holidays share a strange history that did not begin with Halloween. No, that history began with a bang in 1876 when the city of San Francisco exploded an Egyptian mummy to celebrate New Year's Day. Citizens wrapped the mummy in an American flag, primed it with gunpowder, paraded it through a boisterous crowd, and then blew up the body as a flesh-rending firework. Local newspapers described the occasion as solemn and dignified, though certainly not from the poor mummy's point of view. We find an equally destructive, though less explosive, abuse of an Egyptian mummy to celebrate George Washington's birthday in 1887. The mummy was to be unwrapped as part of the holiday's festivities in New Jersey. These public unrollings were gruesome affairs, more suited, you might think, to Halloween than to a president's birthday. But no celebration of All Hallows Eve would involve mummies until many years later. Even then, other American holidays would maintain their hold on mummies. Who could forget the famous Neiman Marcus Christmas kerfuffle of 1971, when its holiday catalog featured two authentic his and hers Egyptian mummy coffins? The company was unaware until after the sale that an ancient corpse still resided in one of the coffins. For the less extravagant among us, merchants today offer assorted mummy Christmas tree ornaments, and there are numerous other ways that mummies have been incorporated into our Yuletide traditions. For example, some people open up their hearts on Valentine's Day by referencing a buried corpse. They send romantic mummy cards like these to their sweethearts. If this were done because the heart was the only major organ left inside a mummy by Egyptian embalmers, then I'd be impressed. But I seriously doubt that's the reason. Naturally, insufferable puns make mummies very popular on Mother's Day. Sooner or later, everyone plays the mummy card, and if not on Mother's Day, then maybe on her birthday instead. Yes, Egyptian mummies have become a part of many of our holidays, whether by selling them, stripping them, exploding them, hanging effigies on festive trees, or drawing them on greeting cards. Yet for most Americans, mummies are all about Halloween. The mummified dead of ancient exotic Egypt seem a perfect complement to the holiday's goblins, ghouls, witches, black cats, and dancing skeletons. But mummies arrived late to this party, a fact not well known to most Halloween enthusiasts. A century ago, the Book of Halloween by Ruth Kelly was the definitive history of the holiday. It was, in fact, the first book-length treatment of the subject. She naturally writes of witches, ghosts, vampires, dragons, devils, and skeletons, but not a single word about mummies. Where were these walking undead of hallowed antiquity, dredged from bat-filled catacombs and steeped in mystery and magic? How could Halloween have existed without them? Look at these magazine ads from the 1950s. The kids have come to the parties dressed as a cowboy, a crook, pirate, spaceman, a clown, witch, devil, ghost, skeleton, rabbit, and leopard, but not one mummy anywhere. Meanwhile, their beer-drinking moms and dads went to costume parties equally bereft of mummies. Their favorite characters included, as one ad states, Prince Schlitz Charming and Little Beau Schlitz Peep, but I see no Schlitz Mummy among them. In my youth, trick-or-treaters could choose from among lots of ready-made plastic masks that represented a more or less mass-produced but mummy-free Halloween, dominated by clowns, kittens, crooks, witches, ghosts, pirates, and assorted demons. Until relatively recently, mummies were considered an uncommon choice for a Halloween costume. In this old newspaper story, a mummy is listed among the so-called unusual characters that included a penguin, turkey, milk bottle, cornstalk, ostrich, and Christmas tree. In the 1950s, mummy costumes were so scarce that they were given prizes for being novel, original, and unique, as you see here in these newspaper clippings. The contrast to today is truly remarkable. We expect to see mummies everywhere, and we are seldom disappointed. They show up at our doorsteps, demanding treats in the holiday's well-established candy extortion racket. We buy off the little tricksters by stocking our homes with appropriately themed mummy treats. We actually give our kids cadaver candy. What on earth would Ruth Kelly think of this? Hungry Halloweeners also eat wieners dressed as mummies, not to mention mummified Oreos, Twinkies, oranges, Rice Krispies, and even meatballs. Halloween today is simply unimaginable without mummies. Newspapers print holiday guides that feature mummies as costumes and puzzles. Of course, there has to be a mummy in the word search, right there, nestled alongside the ghost, monster, witch, and others. Meanwhile, children find holiday frights and fun in a host of mummy toys and trinkets. Stuffed animals, mummy ink pens, mummy trick-or-treat buckets, wind-up mummies, including one that poops candy, and mummy action figures with creepy accessories. Mummies make a lot of sense at Halloween. The holiday celebrates the dead, after all, and mummies are just some saggy skin and dusty wrappings away from that original Halloween standard, the bear skeleton. I once assumed that mummies were an icon of Halloween from very early times. Both have been around for thousands of years, and their union now seems so natural and unforced. The mystery is why they took so long to join together. We start with the fact that mummies used to be seen as more charming than this. They weren't always dragging along in a dangerous temper, seizing their victims by the throat. Mummies were more often imagined as being beautiful, witty, and delightfully festive. For example, the 1845 magazine story, Mr. Grubb's Night with Memnon, gives us the adventures of a dull old pedant who finds himself locked inside a museum where all the Egyptian antiquities come to life after dark. Sounds like a great movie plot, doesn't it? Well, anyway, the amused Mr. Grubb joins the revels and dances with the reanimated mummy of a fair young daughter of the Nile with soft, downy cheeks, roguish, kissable lips, and supernaturally sparkling eyes. There are certainly some very creepy-looking creatures in this illustration, but the mummy is not one of them. In that same year, 1845, Edgar Allan Poe wrote about an erudite, somewhat comical corpse, playfully named Ollamistakeo. The story involves an unwrapped mummy who discusses with his bemused guests a number of subjects to determine whether ancient or modern was the more advanced civilization. On most points, of course, the mummy wins the argument. His world was not steeped in superstition and dark magic, at least not yet. Likewise, an explorer in Théophile Gautier's 1863 novel, The Romance of a Mummy, falls desperately in love with a beautiful Egyptian mummy brought back to life. She is hardly the dismal, deadly, demented creature met in film and fiction today. These mild-mannered, intelligent creatures harbor no evil. They are not yet monsters of our imagination. That explains why the earliest association of mummies with Halloween came late, in 1898, and with a curious twist. This newspaper article, titled Mummy Pictures, remarks on a new fad among high society ladies in New York, namely to be photographed in a mummy's coffin. Promoted by a wealthy widow named Catherine Kernochin, the idea was to dress up in fancy clothes, frame yourself in an Egyptian coffin, and share the photos with your friends and suitors. Wrapped in the antique habiliments of death, these women are nonetheless considered graceful and desirable in this story. It is whispered, writes the reporter, that a number of these weird photographs are to circulate on all Halloween, when the ghostly and the ghastly are always in demand. But why would these women pose in this fashion? Who could expect to find beauty in an Egyptian coffin? Well, the dancing Mr. Grubb, for one, and for another, buyers of Palmolive soap. In the same year as the mummy photograph fad, B.J. Johnson and Company introduced Palmolive soap to the public. This was long promoted as an exotic ancient Egyptian beauty secret, based, of course, on palm and olive oils. Ads made the point by picturing a young Egyptian mummy emerging from her coffin, unwrapping herself to display her charms. She is the reincarnation of beauty, it says, just as Catherine Kernochin and others aspired to be. In 1907, the Moulin Rouge in Paris staged a pantomime in which a young female mummy comes to life and seductively unwinds her wrappings and then passionately kisses, not kills as today, the archaeologist who had awakened her. The show caused a riot because it starred a member of the French aristocracy and because both of the kissing actors were actually women, forcing the abrupt cancellation of the act to the delight of this Midwestern American newspaper. Meanwhile, the first of many movies titled simply The Mummy came to the screen in 1911. The trade magazine Motion Picture World describes the film in this way. The body has been so perfectly mummified that the electric current is all that is necessary to ignite the vital spark, and Jack is amazed to see dancing forth from the case, which he thought contained only unattractive rags and bones, a beautiful Egyptian princess. As soon as she is released, the mummy makes violent love to Jack. In 1918, the popular love song Mummy Mine played upon the same motif, with yet another youthful mummy rising from her coffin. The lyrics lay it on pretty thick. I have waited through the years just sighing. Oh, can't you hear me again crying, waiting? Your love no more denying. My love, my love, my love. In contemporary high fashion, so-called mummy sleeves marked a new fad imported from Paris. Notice the drawing here of another lovely young mummy emerging from her wrappings. The author of this newspaper column was the famous designer Lady Duff Gordon, widely credited with introducing the industry's first professional models, as well as staging the first runway or catwalk fashion shows. When she wrote this, she was a recent survivor of the sinking of the Titanic. You may remember her somewhat unflattering portrayal as a selfish snob in the James Cameron movie. So how did we get from this to this? It began with a teenager's tomb and then accelerated into a mad and monstrous dash through 20th century film and pulp fiction. The teenager's name was Tut. In November 1922, archaeologist Howard Carter and his wealthy patron Lord Carnarvon uncovered the tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun in the Valley of the Kings near Luxor. It was an event that mesmerized the world. Headlines doted on the wondrous beauty and splendor of the finds. The rich and famous flocked to the site to view its treasures, while everyone else followed the story through newspapers and newsreels. Within weeks, people were recording happy little songs like these about the discovery of old King Tut. Yes, old King Tut, the wise old nut. Not yet the boy king, because people just assumed that another aged Egyptian ruler would eventually be found inside this tomb. People imagined him to be a lecherous old playboy, surrounded by young women, incongruously smoking his cigars and drinking his vintage wine. Here is a taste of one of these lyrics. Now old King Tut was just a nut. He ruled for many years. In old King Tutankhamun's day, 1,000 girls would dance each day with lots of hip, hip, hip hooray. Yes, old King Tut was an immediate pop culture icon. Movie producers, too, raced far ahead of the archaeology to star him in a film before anyone even saw his mummy for the first time in 1926. Here, for example, is an October 1923 press release of a now lost silent melodrama titled The Dancer of the Nile. It co-stars the British actor Bertram Graspy as the young Prince Tut. The plot imagined his racy love life before he became the old pharaoh everyone expected to find inside the sarcophagus. The early songs and movies portray the living Tut, not the mummy of Tut, and so did Halloween. Tut's tomb was an immediate holiday hit, but his mummy was conspicuously absent. During the very first Halloween following the discovery of the tomb, King Tut parties were celebrated across America. In Bismarck, North Dakota, for example, kids dressed as the ghosts of many famous persons. Nero, Alexander the Great, Lot's wife, Helen of Troy, Bluebeard the pirate, Mary Queen of Scots, and even Cleopatra, but not one King Tut as man or mummy at the King Tut Halloween party. In Richfield, Utah, there were jack-o'-lanterns, black cats, witches on broomsticks, and a visit to the tomb of King Tut. But, again, no mummies. In Helena, Montana, children celebrated the tomb of King Tut Halloween. They dressed as King Arthur, Sir Lancelot, Sir Galahad, and some as Egyptian princesses, but notably again, none as King Tut. And even when a King Tut, with a Queen Tut too, did show up at one of these parties, it was not as a mummy. Here the king and queen were entertained by a dancer reminiscent of the ones mentioned in the King Tut song and the film The Dancer of the Nile. The event is described as hilarious, not spooky. 100 years ago, King Tut's tomb brought an exotic, over-the-top Egypt into America's Halloween. But this was still an Egypt whose mummies could be seen as charming, articulate, beautiful, fun-loving, even lusty. It took the eventual unboxing of Pharaoh Tutankhamun himself to dispel once and for all this popular image of attractively preserved, desirable Egyptian corpses. When finally revealed to the world in 1926, old King Tut turned out to be a teenager, the now famous Boy King, but with a body that put an end to Palmolive's Beauty's Secret Mummy campaign. The actual face behind the golden mask changed everything. Some people may have seen a real mummy before, but the long-awaited Tut took the whole world by storm. So when Tut's tomb finally brought Tut himself to the party as a real mummy rather than an imagined man, Halloween said goodbye to fun and high fashion and hello to a darker fantasy, a fantasy fed by another key element of the King Tut story, his supposed curse. When Howard Carter's old patron Lord Carnarvon died in Cairo on April 5, 1923, newspapers around the world blamed his demise on an eerie ancient curse. Why? Because most of the reporters had nothing better to do. Carnarvon had given the London Times exclusive rights to cover the excavation, so the rest of the world's journalists were sitting idle at Luxor with no news to report, until Carnarvon himself succumbed to an infected insect bite. He suddenly became their story, hyped by speculations about a possible curse on all who trespassed in the pharaoh's tomb. As you see in this article, It quotes an ancient Egyptian superstition that misfortune dogs the footsteps of him who disturbs the sleep of a pharaoh. To keep their story going, eager reporters kept watch for more potential victims, waiting for Howard Carter and others to die too. The list eventually expanded to include distant relatives, casual acquaintances, and even persons having no association whatever with the excavations. As the years passed, this cursed story took on a life of its own, until the alleged victims included actors just playing the part of victims. Tut's curse was even featured in a court case over the medical bills of a museum watchman who had guarded some of the pharaoh's treasures at an art exhibition. The judge denied his claim, but apparently many others still believe that there is truth behind this curse. When I recently polled a group of college students on the subject of this curse, I was surprised at the results. Nearly half of them believed the curse was real because, as this student wrote, they all died. Well, of course they all died, I explained. The archaeologists were adults, some of them already old adults, 100 years ago. It would only be alarming if they hadn't died in the last century. Howard Carter himself lived another 16 years and died at the age of 64. Dr. Douglas Derry, the anatomist who butchered Tutankhamun's body, died in 1961 at the age of 87. Lady Evelyn Herbert, one of the first persons to enter the tomb, died 57 years later in 1980. Overall, Carter and his associates exceeded the life expectancies of the time. But that has not mattered to reporters, students, or to Halloween. The angry, ugly, vengeful mummy became at last a holiday hit. What Tut started, film and pulp fiction perfected. Magazines gave their readers lecherous mummies on a misogynistic rampage. The tables were turned. Where once old Mr. Grubb danced with a beautiful mummy, now evil mummies preyed upon beautiful women. Where once we could not find scary Halloween mummy masks, they became as common as any other holiday monsters. Naturally, the movies played their part in this transformation. In the decades after Tut, the embalmed dead of ancient Egypt were absorbed into the big screen looniverse of monsters ranging from Frankenstein and Dracula to Godzilla, the Wolfman, and the creature from the Black Lagoon. The standard was set in 1932 with the release of Universal's The Mummy, portrayed by Boris Karloff. Thereafter, a train of movies featured what seemed to be the same maladjusted mummy on an endless loop of leg-dragging terror, with women as their target. Lobby posters screamed the horrible news. It comes to life, half bone, half bandage, and all blood-curdling horror, torn from the tomb to terrify the world, and so on. Halloween finally had the frightening mummies that the holiday always needed, not those benign and beautiful love interests that had dominated the scene before King Tut came along. It may be a surprise that mummies took so long to become synonymous with our Halloween celebrations, but it is no longer a mystery now that we have put the whole matter into historical perspective. Mummies now scare us every Halloween as the original ancient walking dead, wrapped in mystery and mayhem. But it wasn't always that way. Before Hollywood horror hacked Halloween, mummies were good-looking and good company, and more often than not the victims of other holiday celebrations. The real curse has been us all along. If you want to learn more about the fascinating subject of mummies, be sure to read this book, A Mystery from the Mummy Pits, The Amazing Journey of Ankh. It presents a look at a fascinating and unusual feature of Egyptomania. It recounts one of the pioneering investigations of an Egyptian mummy by CT scanning. It provides a readable introduction to modern mummy studies by focusing on a particularly mysterious case. And it uncovers the trafficking of mummies and mummy parts in modern America. The book is available from Oxford University Press.